All right, welcome back to the Security Plus preparation course. Today we're all going to be talking about malware. Malware itself is short for malicious software and refers to any software that can be designed to do harm, exploit, or even compromise our systems, network, or devices. Here we are, right? All right. So malware is one of the most common and dangerous threats in cybersecurity. We're definitely trying to protect ourselves from this because while all attacks a lot of start with social engineering nowadays, malware is really their final intent. In order to gain access to the system, some way or somehow they have to get into the system, and so we need to make sure that the attackers are not able to gain unauthorized access to the system or be able to steal that sensitive information or encrypt our files for ransom or even spy on our users' activity. So let's talk about the different types because there are a lot of different types of malware as we go through this course here, and we need to understand what each type does and how to defend against each one. So our first one is going to be our generic computer virus. It's a type of malware designed to replicate itself by attaching to legitimate programs. They could be on our files or even on our host computer. Once they execute, the viruses will spread from one file to another, causing damage to the infected system. They can cause corruption or make the systems inoperable. Just like biological viruses, computer viruses will rely on a host to spread. Once they activate, once they activate with the infected program or file is opened by the user, they'll start spreading. Common methods on viruses and how they get into our systems will be email attachments. They can come through attachments in emails, and once they're open, the virus will infect the recipient's computer. We have our infected software, so as users download and install software from untrusted sources can introduce viruses into our systems. We have removable media, which is like USB drives or external hard drives when they're plugged into the system. And the big thing here is downloaded material of one way, shape, or form. They're coming in through a downloaded material. Now, steps for a virus attack for one will be infection. Viruses attaches itself to a legitimate file or program and then enters the system. We would then try to execute the virus once it's activated, and then it will start replicating. Once it starts replicating, the virus will start spreading to other files or even systems within our environment. And then finally, the virus will deliver its payload, which normally involves corrupting data, stealing information, or even disabling the system. But first, it needs to execute and replicate, because if it starts executing its payload right off the bat, just like a virus in the biological realm, it wouldn't spread to very many hosts. We have different types of viruses out there. We've got our file infectors. These themselves attach themselves to executable files like exe files and activate when the program is run. These viruses can spread to other executable files and cause the programs to crash or behave erratically. We've got our boot sector viruses. These will try to get into our master boot records of our hard drives of removable media or making it very difficult to detect and remove. These type of viruses activate when the systems are booted up or when the USB drives are plugged in. We have our macro viruses. These are normally written in macro languages such as Word or Excel, and they often spread through infected documents and activate when the document is open. These can also be put into other documents such as PDFs or anything that allows macros to run. And then we've got our polymorphic viruses. These ones are hard to detect because they change their code. They change their signature each time that they move or each new file that they infect, making it harder to detect by a traditional antivirus software. These viruses are designed to evade detection by constantly evolving and changing. Next, we've got worms. Well, a worm is a type of malware that's similar to a virus, but it has its own ability to replicate and spread. Unlike viruses, worms do not need to attach themselves to any existing programs or files. Instead, worms can spread by themselves and often exploit vulnerabilities in an operating system, a network, or an application. Once the worm infects a system, it replicates itself to other systems, usually without interaction from a user. The steps of a worm is, for one, it needs to be infected, usually by scanning a network for weaknesses for unpatched software. Once a vulnerability is found, the worm infects the system. The worm then replicates itself on the infected system, creating multiple copies of itself. Once it does this, the worm will then try to exploit other systems that it's connected to in its networks. This is normally in an automated way and can occur very, very quickly. Once all the worm is carried out throughout the network, it will then deliver its malicious payload, which could be multiple multitudes of things, such as installing backdoors, stealing data, or launching denial of service attacks, making your machine into a botnet, which we'll talk further in this episode. We have different types of worms. Our first worm is going to be our network worm. They like to go through network protocols and services. They are capable of moving from one device to another without user intervention, and they infect the entire network. We've got our email worms, where they spread throughout email attachments or exploit vulnerabilities in email clients. And these worms often access the victim's address book and sends it on to other people that you also communicate with. We've got our file sharing worms, who will look for peer-to-peer connections, or like CIFS or NFS or any of these other types of network shares, and try to spread through network shares. We've got our internet worms, where they'll scan for vulnerabilities within the systems within the internet and get into things that are unpatched or within bad network configurations. These type of worms can give some major disruptions by infecting a large number of systems globally. We've got our instant messaging worms. Instant messaging worms spread through chat applications by sending malicious links to the victim's contact list. We could see these through SMS or through other applications themselves. Now, how do we know about a worm? Well, the effect of a worm, otherwise known as an indicator of compromise, can show in multiple different ways. We can see it as network disruptions, where we have a large number of network bandwidth that's slowing down our network. We can start seeing our systems overload, such as our CPU or our memory utilization gets really, really large, maybe slow down or even crash our systems. They can create backdoors, allowing attackers to gain authorized access. They can start stealing data or destruction of said data. Most of the time we'll see this through network because they're trying to exfiltrate the information. And then the other thing is they can spread other malware. Sometimes worms will come in and try to disguise themselves as good things, such as fake adware, and install other bad malware on your systems to compound the damage. So how do we defend against worms? Well, we need to make sure that our software is updated. We need to patch our systems. We need to make sure that we're using firewalls and IDSs within our network to ensure that only the supported traffic that we want in our network is actually there. We need to make sure that our devices are segmented, so that way if we do have an attack or an infection, that it's limited to the machines that worm can touch. We need to make sure we have great backups, because these backups are going to be needed to recover from these worms. And lastly, employee training. We need to make sure that employees are not installing untrusted software or dealing with things they're not supposed to be doing within our systems. Our next environment is going to be on Trojans. So Trojans themselves, otherwise known as a Trojan horse, is a type of malware that disguises itself as legitimate software to try to deceive the user into downloading and executing it on their system. Unlike viruses and worms, Trojans do not replicate themselves. Instead, they rely on social engineering tactics to trick users into installing them. Now, there's a ton of systems out there that do this, but Trojans can perform a variety of malicious activities, but also provide some real software. So how do they work? They do look real, and they do operate as designed, but they may also steal some sensitive information like passwords or credit card information. They might grant attackers remote access into the system, allowing them to control it. They might install other types of malware, such as ransomware or spyware. They might corrupt or delete files, leading to system malfunctions or crashes. So how do they work? Well, for one, we've got to be infected. The user needs to download and install the Trojan, believing it's a legitimate application. Then they'll execute, often without the user's knowledge, carrying through its actions it was actually designed for. And depending on the Trojan horse, it may be stealing data, open a back door, and allow an attacker to take the system. And then Trojans need ongoing control, so they need the attacker to be able to still control and monitor the system over time. Now, we've got a lot of different types of Trojans out there. We've got the remote access Trojans, which allow us to remote access the infected system, often without even the user's knowledge, giving us full control over the system. We have banking Trojans that are designed to steal financial information, like online banking credentials or credit cards or other sensitive information. We've got downloader Trojans that are designed to install other malware, other ransomware, spyware on this system. We've got spyware Trojans that are supposed to monitor user activity, logging keystrokes, capturing screenshots, accessing your webcam, whatever it may be. We've got backdoor Trojans, which have a hidden entry point into the system, allowing allowing attackers to bypass your normal security measures and gaining access to the system. We've got our rootkit Trojans, which are allowing the Trojan to hide within the presence of the system. In other words, rootkits are at the base of the system. A lot of times they're in the kernel or in the firmware, and they're really hard to detect. Well, how do they spread? Well, they spread through email attachments, fake software downloads, compromised websites, or even in software bundles. Trojans can be hidden in software bundles where the Trojan is installed alongside legitimate software, but users may not realize that they're installing malicious software along with the intended program. That's why you always grab your programs from the source and not from a third party. Well, how do we defend against Trojans? Well, we do need to use antivirus. We need to make sure that we're downloading our software from trusted sources and not from untrusted sources. Be wary about email attachments. If somebody emails you over a piece of software, maybe it's better to go grab it from a trusted source. We need to make sure that we're using our firewalls and our network security tools to be able to detect unusual traffic. And then lastly, always keep updated. You're going to see that all the time. We need to make sure that we are patched. Ransomware is the next one we want to talk about. And ransomware is pretty easy to remember because it encrypts the files or the system directly and renders the data inaccessible or the whole system inaccessible until the ransom is paid. So the steps in a ransomware attack is, for one, we got to be infected. Many times these come through phishing emails, but they can be in malicious attachments, compromised websites, or any kind of software vulnerability itself. The next step is the ransomware will scan the system and start encrypting files, making them inaccessible for the users, and it may even lock out the entire system until you pay the ransom demand. The ransom demand is presented as a ransom note, normally demanding payment in cryptocurrency. The note contains instructions on how to pay and a warning of a failure if they do not pay. Maybe they stole data before they encrypted your machine, and now they're threatening to release it unless you pay the demand as well. There's a lot of different types of ransomwares. We've got our encrypting ransomware, pretty normal as crypto ransomware. Crypto ransomware renders the system inaccessible without the decryption key. We have our locker ransomware, which locks the system completely out, where it may not encrypt the actual files, but lock you out of the device entirely. We've got scareware, which is a type of ransomware trick to say, hey, we're going to do something, or an illegal activity has been detected, and we're going to release this unless you pay a ransom to fix the issue. And then we've got double extortion, which is starting to become more and more popular, where they'll lock you out of your system, you pay the ransom, and then the attacker threatens to still give that data out publicly, and you may have to pay another ransom to get that data deleted as well. And then finally, we now have ransomware as a service, which is a online cyber criminal will create ransomware packages or kits for sale on dark web marketplaces, allowing script kiddies or other people to get involved with ransomware. It spreads by phishing, it spreads by malicious downloads, exploiting software vulnerabilities, or even through RDP exploits. Any software that's just not um, patched. Now, what are we going to see? We can see data loss, financial loss, reputational damage, or even operational disruption, in which most of the time we might see a little bit of all of these. Okay. Let's talk about zombies and botnets. So zombies and botnets themselves um, are an older technology, but definitely still around. So a zombie is a computer device that's been infected with malware, allowing an attacker to remote control it without the owner's knowledge. And a network of these compromised systems are known as botnets. Okay, they are used for denial of service attacks, spamming, cryptocurrency mining, a whole bunch of different things. But in order to have a botnet, the first thing we need to do is we need to infect a ton of users. Once a ton of users are created as a zombie, we then need to have a command and control server. A C2 server is what it's known as. The zombie will connect to a command and control server, which will allow the attacker to issue commands to the compromised systems. This will then create a botnet, which will allow them to keep adding more and more zombies to the botnet to give the attacker greater ability to do large-scale attacks. Malicious activity will then happen henceforth, such as DDoS, spamming, credential stuffing, or crypto mining, often overwhelming the systems and stealing data. So we have already talked about this. One of the big ones that we haven't talked a lot about is crypto stuffing. Crypto stuffing is where we try a large number of username and password combinations to access into a system. While this method can be very hard to do because a lot of systems lock you out, a lot of online systems lock you out based off your IP address. Well, what if I try to hit it from 1,000 different machines? Now I have 1,000 different machines to try this with. Okay. Let's talk about rootkits. Rootkits themselves are malicious software that's designed to gain unauthorized access to a system while hiding in the presence of other malware. Rootkits allow attackers to maintain privileged access and take full control over the infected system without detection. Again, we need to be infected. We need to find a way to escalate the privileges. They need to be running as root access or admin access, giving the attacker full access to the system. They like to hide, and what they like to do is they like to hide in presence of other malware or backdoors that they've installed, or they like to hide in the kernel and the firmware of the software itself. And then they need ongoing control. So the attacker itself needs to be able to issue commands, steal information, and maybe even install additional adware or malware without detection. Now, I said there's a lot of different types of these, and so kernel level rootkits are the most powerful and the most dangerous because they operate at the core of the operating system. As soon as you power up the machine, they are running. We've got user mode rootkits that operate at a higher level of the operating system, usually as soon as a user logs in, and they run as applications or processes. We've got our firmware rootkits where we run all the way down into the hardware side of things, where they might be within the drivers or into the firmware software of the machine. These rootkits are very, very dangerous because they can survive system reboots, operating system reinstallations, and even sometimes hard drive replacements, which is really crazy. We got our boot kits that run on a hard drive directly. They might run in the master boot record of a hard drive. We've got our hypervisor rootkits. These ones live within the operating system technology of virtual machines, and which are really hard to intercept because now they can intercept information from any virtual machine within their machine. Well, how do they spread? Well, they spread just like any other type of malware, mostly phishing emails, software vulnerabilities, downloads. But another one that I like to add on this one is called drive-by downloads. Drive-by downloads automatically installed on the systems of users, and these can be installed without the user's consent or knowledge. Drive-by could be somebody who just walks by with a USB drive, plugs it in, unplugs it, and walks away. Now, of course, our effects is now these attackers are going to have full system control. They may have some data theft. We might have some undetectable malware. We might have system instability. It might be crashing. And we might have some persistence that will just allow it to continue running even through reboots. Next, we have backdoors. Backdoor is a hidden entry point onto a system that allows an attacker to bypass the security mechanisms such as authentication to gain access to an unauthorized access to the system. Well, how do they work? They have to work usually by installing software to allow secret access. Can be used as an initial original design of a piece of software, normally found by a listening port on a computer. Now, we have a couple of different types of backdoors. We have malware installed backdoors that are installed as an entry point when malware gets installed. We have hardware backdoors where they're built into devices during the manufacturing process. This is why we have to have supply chain management. We have application backdoors, which may be installed by the developer, or they can intentionally leave the backdoor in for maybe debugging or maintenance purposes. We have remote access Trojans, which are backdoors. These can be installed with the attacker attacks once the attacker is now within your system. Now, how do we fix this? Well, we need to make sure that we're regularly scanning our systems for unknown listening ports and unknown network traffic. We need to make sure that we're patching our system. We need to make sure that we're monitoring our network access and our network traffic. And then we need to make sure that we're improving or implementing strong access controls such as MFA to try to prevent these backdoors from happening. Now, a logic bomb is a malicious code that can be triggered when certain conditions are met. Now, these conditions could be a date, an event, a system state, whatever it may be. They'll lie dormant until the conditions are met, making them very difficult to detect. Now, these different things that we try to say that they can bounce off of is a certain time, a certain event, or even user data. When a certain type of user logs in, or when a user account gets deleted, or a certain software gets installed, these types of logic bombs exist. Well, how do we protect against these? Well, we need to make sure that we're auditing all the code of our developers and making sure that the code itself does not have a logic bomb installed on it. We need to monitor our system activity. We need to limit our insider access. In other words, we don't allow unauthorized access into our systems. Otherwise, they may plant a logic bomb within our systems. And then we need to make sure we have plenty of backups and recovery in case we miss one. Keyloggers are a type of malware that allow you to secretly record keystrokes made on mobile devices or in computers. They like to capture information. They could be usernames, passwords, credit card informations. They can have screenshots or maybe even webcam information. Keyloggers are software-based normally, but there's definitely a lot of ways to do this. Now, how do they get on our computer? Well, for one, they've got to get installed. So somehow they came into our system, whether or not that's through social engineering or some installation of some insecure software. They'll start recording our keystrokes of the victims, and then they'll store it. Once they're stored, they need to get it back out of the system. So a lot of times you'll find a C2 system here, a command and control system, that will exploit that information into the attacker system, so that way they can use that information, such as logging into websites, credentials, whatever they need to do. Now, there are different types of keyloggers. There's software, hardware, and most of the time when we're dealing with distribution that does not have physical access, we're going to be dealing with software keyloggers, but physical keyloggers do exist. Okay. Now, let's talk about spyware and bloatware. Spyware itself is in software that can negatively impact your system, but spyware is designed to secretly monitor you and steal sensitive information. Now, they come in a lot of different ways. They can be a keylogger. They can be adware. They're showing you ads by the behind the scenes stealing information. They can steal things like cookies out of browsers, tracking cookies themselves, or they can be even stealthy spyware. And stealthy spyware itself is designed to be completely hidden from users in security software. It runs in the background and often captures information. Okay. Now, bloatware itself is a lot like spyware, except for bloatware, most of the time is there just to slow down performance. It can consume storage space, it can have a lot of annoying ads and notifications, but they could have additional security risks because they could have other vulnerabilities built into it. Now, when you're buying a new computer out in the wild, you'll notice there's a lot of pre-installed software. This is called bloatware. These pre-installed softwares or trialwares can be installed by default, and I highly recommend getting rid of them. Now, adware itself is a bloatware because it can also slow down the system, but it generates ads and pop-ups for other people. So let's talk about malware techniques. So we've talked about social engineering before. Now, when we're talking about malware, we can have phishing attacks, we can have drive-by, we can have malvertising, where we've got a whole bunch of stuff here, right? If you look through here, we got exploit kit, social engineering, Trojan horse, ransomware, worms, fileless malware, malware that actually runs just in memory, not on the hard drive, rootkits that could be hidden very far away. We've got our command and control servers where maybe they're exfiltrating data or needing remote commands. And then sometimes the stuff can be installed before we even get it, and it could be a supply chain attack itself. And the biggest supply chain attack itself I could think of, the last one was SolarWinds, where it was monitoring a lot of systems, and the code got installed into their base code and then disseminated as a patch. Now, there's a lot of different malware evasion techniques, like we can find malware that encrypts itself or encrypts different things on our hard drives. We have malware that tries to change itself as it moves along, so it's polymorphism. We try to have things that it will hide data within images, or just stenography. We can have code obfuscation, where they change their code all the time. Or maybe they're even living off the land, which means they're they're using tools that are built into the computer directly, didn't install anything new, so they're hard to detect. Now, indicators of compromise, indications that you may have a malware installed on your computer, is something like we may have unusual system behaviors. They might slow down or freeze or crash randomly. We might have unexpected pop-ups or for like adware or spyware. We might have a high CPU memory utilization even though we're not doing anything, like cryptojacking or anything like that. We could have unexplained network activities where our malware is reaching out to a C2 environment. We could have new and unrecognized programs start showing up on our computers. We can have browser redirections where we try to go to a website, but they didn't really take us there. So what's going on here? We can have disabled security tools. All of a sudden, our antivirus is turned off or our firewall got turned off. Well, how did that happen? We have strange emails popping out, such as, worms or bots trying to use our email system to spread its message. We can have ransom demands. Well, that's an easy way to know we have ransomware. And then we could definitely make sure that there could be unusual disk activity on our system itself. Now, how do we protect this? Well, we need to disconnect it from the network. Let's stop the bleed. Let's run our antiviruses and our protection softwares. We need to ensure that we quickly scan it for malware and ensure that we remove it quickly. We need to make sure that, are there any unusual programs or processes running, and how do we end them? We need to make sure that our software is up to date. We need in a worst case scenario, we may want to restore our backups. And then finally, I like to say seek professional help or otherwise nuke it from orbit. Do you really trust the system now, or should we completely wipe it, start it over, so we know that it's completely clean? All right, so if you're in class, this is going to be time for Kahoot, but otherwise, that'll be it for today's video. And as we move through this, we're going to continue our journey for Security Plus. Our next video is going to be on data protection. So data protection and cryptographic solutions are our next two lessons. Keep learning.